Global Nightmares Tales from the Midnight Highway Part 2. Now that you've survived our first 4 encounters from the darkest stretches of road, are you brave enough to continue the journey? The night is still young, and there are more tales waiting to be told, stories of highways where reality thins like morning mist, where the boundaries between our world and others become dangerously permeable. Lock your doors, check your rearview mirror, and remember, on certain roads after midnight, you're never truly alone. Highway of Echoes. The first signs that something was wrong came when the GPS lost signal. "Damn it," Mateo Hernandez muttered, tapping the screen mounted on his dashboard. The blue dot representing his location had frozen, and the soothing female voice that had been guiding him for the past 4 hours had fallen silent. Outside his windshield, the highway stretched before him like a black ribbon, illuminated only by his headlights and the occasional reflective marker. On either side, the Mexican countryside was a void of darkness, the mountains visible only as deeper shadows against the star-strewn sky. No streetlights, no buildings, no other vehicles, just Mateo, his car, and the endless road. At 41, Mateo had made this drive dozens of times in his 20 years as a pharmaceutical sales representative. The route from Guadalajara to Durango was familiar territory, even if this particular stretch of newly constructed highway through the Sierra Madre Occidental was not. His company had insisted he take this route. It would save nearly 2 hours of travel time, they'd said. What they hadn't mentioned was how utterly isolated it would be. Mateo checked his watch, 11:47 p.m. He'd been hoping to reach Durango before midnight, but without GPS, he wasn't sure how much farther he had to go. His cell phone showed no service, not unusual in these remote mountain passes. "At least I can't get lost," he reassured himself. "One road in, one road out." To break the silence, he turned on the radio, scanning for any station that might penetrate the mountain barrier. Static, static, more static. Then, unexpectedly clear a voice. "You're listening to Radio Nocturno, keeping you company through the darkest hours. It's 11:48 p.m. and you're on Highway 40D. Drive safely, amigos." Mateo frowned. The announcement had been oddly specific, as if the broadcast were meant just for him. And how did they know exactly which highway he was on? Perhaps it was a specialized station for this new route. "Our next segment is for those lonely night drivers," the announcer continued, his voice deep and soothing. "Share your road stories with us. Call in at—" The signal dissolved into static before the number was announced. Mateo turned the dial, trying to find the station again, but it was gone. With a sigh, he switched to a music playlist on his phone, letting the familiar melodies of old Mexican ballads fill the car. Outside, the landscape had begun to change subtly. The road now cut through tall rock formations that rose like sentinels on either side, creating a natural tunnel effect. His headlights illuminated strange patterns in the stone whorls and striations that almost resembled faces if he looked too long. A green highway sign appeared in his headlights. Tunnel de los Ecos, 2 kilometers. The Tunnel of Echoes, an apt name for a mountain passage, he supposed. As Mateo approached the tunnel entrance, a strange sensation washed over him, a pressure in his ears as if he were ascending rapidly, followed by a momentary dizziness. The music from his phone distorted, slowing down before cutting out entirely. The car's electronics flickered, dashboard lights, blinking headlights momentarily dimming. "What the hell?" Mateo muttered, gripping the wheel tighter as he entered the tunnel. The passage was longer than he expected. The overhead lights spaced far apart, creating alternating pools of harsh fluorescence and deep shadow. The air inside seemed denser somehow, and sounds behaved strangely. The engine's rumble echoed back with a delay, as if the tunnel were much larger than it appeared. Halfway through, Mateo's radio suddenly came to life again, though he hadn't touched the dial. "Approaching the midpoint now," said the same announcer from before. "Can you feel it, Mateo? The thinning of the veil?" Mateo's blood ran cold. How did the radio announcer know his name? "This isn't possible," he said aloud, his voice sounding foreign in the strange acoustics of the tunnel. The radio crackled with soft laughter. "Many things are possible in the Tunnel of Echoes, especially on nights like this. The old ones knew that's why they avoided this pass. They built their roads the long way around." Mateo reached to turn off the radio, but it continued playing despite the power being off. "Don't be afraid," the voice soothed. "You're not the first traveler to pass through here, and you won't be the last. Unless, of course, you stop." "What do you mean?" Mateo found himself asking, even as part of his mind screamed that talking to a radio was insanity. "The tunnel remembers all who pass through it," the voice explained. "Sometimes it keeps echoes of them. The ones who stopped, they echo forever." As if in response to these words, Mateo's headlights illuminated something ahead that made him slam on the brakes, a car parked in the middle of the tunnel, hazard lights blinking. An old model Volkswagen Beetle, its blue paint faded and dusty. Mateo brought his car to a complete stop about 10 meters behind the Beetle. The tunnel suddenly seemed quieter, the echoes of his engine dying away unnaturally quickly. He should honk, he knew, or carefully drive around the obstacle, but something about the abandoned car sent shivers down his spine. "Hello?" he called out, rolling down his window slightly. "Do you need help?" No answer came, but as Mateo watched, the driver's door of the Beetle slowly opened. No one emerged. "I wouldn't get out if I were you," the radio announcer said conversationally. "In fact, I'd drive around right now, quickly." The rational part of Mateo's brain, the part that dealt in pharmaceutical facts and sales figures, knew he should listen to this advice. But another part, the curious part that had always gotten him into trouble as a child, wondered what might happen if he investigated. After all, someone might be hurt. "What happens to people who stop in the tunnel?" he asked the radio. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" the announcer replied. "She's been waiting for someone to talk to for, about 20 years now." As if on cue, a figure emerged from the Beetle, a young woman in clothing that indeed appeared to be from the early 2000s. Her movements were strangely fluid, almost gliding as she approached Mateo's car. Her face, illuminated by his headlights, was pretty but expressionless, her eyes reflecting the light in a way that wasn't quite human. Mateo's instinct screamed at him to drive to floor the accelerator and get away from whatever this was, but before he could act, the woman was at his window. "Help me," she whispered, her voice somehow both inside and outside the car simultaneously. "My car broke down and my phone has no signal. Could you give me a ride to the next town?" Though her words were ordinary, her voice had an unnatural quality, a slight delay as if he were hearing both her words and their echo. Her eyes never blinked, and though she stood in the direct path of his headlights, she cast no shadow. I'm sorry," Mateo stammered, "but I don't think I can help you." He reached to roll up his window, but nothing happened when he pressed the button. The woman's expression remained unchanged, but her next words sent ice through Mateo's veins. "Everyone says that. They all drive away, except the ones who don't, the ones who stay and become echoes like me." "What do you mean, echoes?" Mateo asked, unable to stop himself. The woman's face literally flickered like an old television with poor reception. For a brief moment, Mateo saw another face superimposed over hers, skull-like with empty eye sockets and a gaping jaw. "The tunnel remembers," she said simply. "It keeps pieces of those who pass through. Sometimes just memories, sometimes more. I stopped to help someone just as you've stopped for me. Now I'm here, always here, an echo of myself, repeating. Her voice began to loop, repeating the last word over and over, each iteration becoming more distorted, repeating. "Drive now," the radio announcer interjected urgently. "Don't look back, don't stop again until you're out of the tunnel." This time, Mateo didn't hesitate. He swerved around the Beetle and accelerated, the engine's roar bouncing off the tunnel walls. In his rearview mirror, he saw the woman standing in the middle of the road watching him, her form growing indistinct around the edges as if she were dissolving into the air itself. The Beetle, too, seemed to be fading, becoming transparent until both car and driver were nothing more than shapes suggested by the tunnel's shadows. The radio spoke once more. "Almost there now, just a little farther. But I should warn you, the tunnel has tasted you now. It knows your echo. Part of you will always remain here, just as part of here will always remain with you." The exit appeared ahead, a perfect circle of starry night sky. As Mateo hurtled toward it, the radio added a final chilling thought. And don't be surprised if you hear yourself sometimes echoing back from places you've never been. That's just the nature of the tunnel. Once it has your voice, it never truly lets it go. Mateo's car burst from the tunnel like a bullet from a gun, the sudden openness of the landscape making him feel momentarily disoriented. The radio immediately died, and his phone's music resumed playing as if nothing had happened. Heart hammering against his ribs, Mateo drove without slowing for nearly 20 minutes, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the tunnel of echoes. Only when he saw lights ahead, a small roadside service station, did he finally ease off the accelerator. The service station was a welcome island of fluorescent normality after his experience in the tunnel. Mateo parked under the bright lights of the gas pumps and sat for a moment, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Had he hallucinated the entire incident? Perhaps he had briefly dozed off while driving. It wouldn't be the first time a late-night journey had played tricks on his mind. Yet it had felt so real. The woman with her strange echoing voice, the radio announcer who knew his name, the flicker of a skull beneath human features. Needing human contact, Mateo entered the station's small convenience store. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a bushy mustache, nodded a greeting. "Rough night on the road?" he asked, noting Mateo's disheveled appearance. "You could say that," Mateo replied, selecting a coffee from the self-serve machine. "I just came through the tunnel of echoes. Had some strange experiences." The attendant's expression changed, a flicker of recognition, or was it fear crossing his features? That new tunnel on Highway 40D, lot of stories about that place already, and it's only been open 6 months. "What kind of stories?" Mateo asked, suddenly alert. The attendant glanced around, though they were the only ones in the store. People seeing things that aren't there, cars that appear and disappear, strange radio broadcasts. He lowered his voice. "My cousin works highway maintenance. Says they've had 3 maintenance workers quit after night shifts in that tunnel. One of them, Rodrigo, hasn't been the same since. Keeps talking to people who aren't there, says he can hear voices in empty rooms." Mateo's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "Has anyone disappeared in there?" "Not officially," the attendant said with emphasis on the last word. "But there are rumors about vehicles entering the tunnel and never coming out the other side. The authorities say it's nonsense that their monitoring systems would detect any accidents or stop vehicles." He shrugged. "All I know is I won't drive that stretch at night. Neither will most locals. Wish my company had mentioned that before sending me this way," Mateo muttered. "Where you headed?" "Durango." "You're almost there," the attendant said. "Another 30 minutes, give or take. No more tunnels between here and there." Mateo finished his coffee, paid, and returned to his car, the attendant's words providing little comfort. As he pulled back onto the highway, his radio suddenly switched on by itself, tuning to the same station he'd heard in the tunnel. "We hope you enjoyed your journey through the tunnel of echoes, Mateo," said the familiar voice of the announcer. "A part of you will always remain with us, echoing through the passage. Listen carefully in the days to come, and you might just hear yourself calling back." The broadcast dissolved into static, then silence. Mateo quickly turned the radio off and drove the remaining distance to Durango in tense silence, jumping at every shadow that crossed his headlights. He reached his hotel shortly after 1 a.m., exhausted and still shaken. After checking in, he collapsed onto the bed without bothering to undress, hoping that sleep would reset his frayed nerves. Perhaps in daylight the tunnel experience would seem less terrifying, more explicable. But as he drifted toward sleep, a voice whispered in his ear, his own voice, but with that same unnatural echo he'd heard in the tunnel. "The tunnel remembers. And now so do you." Mateo bolted upright, heart racing, but the room was empty. Just his imagination, surely. He lay back down, pulling the covers tight around himself like a child afraid of monsters under the bed. Over the next few days, as he conducted his pharmaceutical presentations in Durango, Mateo tried to put the tunnel incident behind him. By day, surrounded by doctors and hospital administrators, it was easy to dismiss as stress-induced hallucination or a waking dream. But at night, alone in his hotel room, he would sometimes catch glimpses of the woman from the tunnel in reflective surfaces, just for an instant in the bathroom mirror, or fleetingly in the glass of his laptop screen. Once he saw her standing behind him in the reflection of a darkened window, her mouth moving as if speaking, though no sound came out. Worse were the voices, snippets of conversations he hadn't had played back in his own voice. Sometimes he would hear himself talking while he was alone in his hotel room, discussing topics he knew nothing about, using phrases he would never say. Once he woke to find himself standing by the hotel room door at 3 a.m., hand on the doorknob with no memory of having gotten out of bed. On the day he was scheduled to return to Guadalajara, Mateo made a decision. He would not go back through the Tunnel of Echoes. Instead, he would take the older, longer route, the one the locals used. It might add 2 hours to his journey, but after what he'd experienced, that seemed a small price to pay. He informed his office of the change, citing safety concerns with the new highway. His manager was displeased but didn't press the issue. Mateo checked out of his hotel, loaded his car, and set off on the old highway that wound its way through small towns and villages instead of cutting directly through the mountains. The drive was pleasant in daylight, the landscape beautiful in a rugged way. Mateo began to relax, convincing himself that putting physical distance between himself and the tunnel would weaken whatever strange connection had formed. Halfway back to Guadalajara, he stopped for lunch at a roadside restaurant in a small town. The place was nearly empty except for an elderly couple and a man sitting alone in a corner booth, face hidden behind a newspaper. Mateo ordered and then visited the restroom. As he washed his hands, he studiously avoided looking directly at the mirror, a habit he'd developed over the past week. But something in his peripheral vision made him turn. There in the mirror was his reflection, but it wasn't mimicking his movements. Mirror Mateo stood perfectly still, watching him with an unblinking gaze. "The tunnel remembers," his reflection said, its mouth moving independently of his own. "You can take the long way around, but there are echoes of the tunnel everywhere if you know how to listen. And now so do you." Mateo stumbled backward, a cry escaping his throat. He blinked and his reflection was normal again, copying his terrified expression perfectly. Shaken, he returned to his table where his food had arrived. He ate mechanically, trying to convince himself that stress and lack of sleep were causing these hallucinations. "First time through the area?" asked a voice from the neighboring table. The man with the newspaper had lowered it, revealing a face that made Mateo's fork clatter to his plate. It was the radio announcer from the tunnel, the same deep, resonant voice, the same knowing eyes. In person, he looked ordinary enough, a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and the weathered complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. But there was something in his gaze that seemed to see through Mateo. "You," Mateo began, then stopped, unsure what to say. "You were on the radio, in the tunnel." The man smiled, neither confirming nor denying. "The Tunnel of Echoes has been there long before they built a road through it. The indigenous people of these mountains knew about it, a place where voices would come back different than they went in. The Spanish conquistadors learned to avoid it after several of their expeditions vanished without a trace." "What is it?" Mateo asked, his fear momentarily overcome by curiosity. "A thin spot," the man replied, as if that explained everything. "A place where our world and others press so closely together that sometimes things slip through. Mostly just sounds, echoes, bouncing between realities. But sometimes more. People or things that were once people caught between here and elsewhere. Like the woman in the Blue Beetle," Mateo said quietly. The man nodded. "Maria Diaz. Stopped to help what she thought was a stranded motorist in 2002. She's been offering the same help to others ever since, hoping someone will finally break her cycle." He gave Mateo an appraising look. "You were smart not to get out of your car. Those who do rarely get back in." "How do you know all this? Who are you?" "I'm a guardian of sorts," the man said. "I try to help travelers navigate the tunnel safely. Some listen, some don't." He leaned forward. "But you've got a bigger problem now. The tunnel has your echo, and it's growing stronger. I can see it clinging to you like a shadow." Mateo felt a chill run through him. "What does that mean?" "It means part of you is copied, duplicated, and that copy remains in the tunnel. But it's not content to stay there. It wants what you have, your life, your reality." "That's impossible," Mateo said, but without conviction. "Is it? Haven't you heard yourself speaking words you never said, seen yourself in places you haven't been?" woken up doing things you don't remember starting. The man's eyes bored into him. Your echo is trying to cross over completely, and if it succeeds, you'll be the one trapped in the tunnel while it lives your life out here. Matteo thought of the reflection in the bathroom mirror moving independently, the voices in empty rooms, walking in his sleep. How do I stop it? You have to return to the tunnel, the man said. Face your echo directly, reclaim what it took from you. Go back. Matteo shook his head violently. No, never. Then prepare to fade, the man said simply. Your echo grows stronger each day while you grow weaker. Eventually you'll be nothing but a whisper, and it will have everything that was once yours. He stood leaving some bills on his table. If you change your mind, enter the tunnel exactly at midnight. That's when the boundary is thinnest. Listen for my voice on the radio. I'll guide you as best I can. With that he walked out, leaving Matteo alone with his cold food and colder fear. For the rest of the drive to Guadalajara, Matteo tried to convince himself that the encounter had been another hallucination. But deep down he knew it had been real as the woman in the tunnel, as real as his own voice echoing from empty rooms. Back home things quickly deteriorated. Colleagues commented on his erratic behavior in discussions he had no memory of participating in. His girlfriend of 3 years broke up with him, claiming he'd become a different person, sometimes cruel in ways that weren't like him at all. Twice he found himself in parts of the city with no recollection of how he'd gotten there. Most terrifying of all were the phone calls from himself. His cell phone would ring, and when he answered, his own voice would respond, "Let me in. I'm getting stronger and you're getting weaker. Soon I won't need your permission at all." After 3 weeks of this escalating terror, Matteo made his decision. He would return to the tunnel of echoes. Whatever awaited him there couldn't be worse than slowly losing his grip on reality, on his very identity. He set out from Guadalajara in the afternoon, timing his arrival at the tunnel for midnight as the mysterious man had advised. The journey felt like a march toward execution, each kilometer bringing him closer to a confrontation he couldn't fully comprehend. As he approached the mountain pass where the tunnel was located, his radio began picking up fragments of broadcast, the same station, Radio Nocturno. "Approaching now," said the familiar voice of the announcer. "Right on time, Matteo. Your echo is waiting for you. It knows you're coming." "What do I do when I get there?" Matteo asked aloud, no longer questioning the impossibility of the two-way radio conversation. "Enter the tunnel and stop at the midpoint where the boundary is thinnest. Step out of your car, call to your echo. It will come to you, drawn by the chance to fully cross over. And then what?" "Then you must take back what's yours. How you do that, I cannot say. Each traveler faces their echo differently." The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, a black maw in the mountainside. As Matteo's car crossed the threshold, he felt the same pressure change, the same dizziness he'd experienced before. His headlights seemed dimmer inside, barely penetrating the unnatural darkness. He drove slowly, counting the overhead lights, looking for the midpoint. When he reached it, a section where the tunnel widened slightly to accommodate an emergency phone booth, he pulled over and stopped. For a long moment, Matteo sat in the idling car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. Everything in him screamed to drive on, to flee this place of echoes and shadows, but he knew that would only delay the inevitable. His echo was growing stronger daily. Soon it would consume him entirely. Taking a deep breath, Matteo stepped out of the car. The tunnel was eerily silent, his footsteps making no echo despite the hard concrete surfaces surrounding him. The air felt thick, resistant, as if he were moving through water rather than atmosphere. "I'm here," he called out, his voice sounding flat and muffled. "Show yourself." Nothing happened at first. Then gradually Matteo became aware of a sound, footsteps approaching from the darkness beyond his car's headlights. Not from either entrance of the tunnel, but from somewhere in the solid rock wall itself. A figure stepped into the light himself, or rather, an exact duplicate. The Echo Matteo looked identical in every way, except for its eyes, which reflected the light like an animal's, and a certain quality to its movements that seemed just slightly wrong, as if it were wearing Matteo's body, like an ill-fitting suit. Finally, Echo Matteo set its voice, an unsettling harmony of Matteo's own tones, layered with something older, deeper. face to face at last. "What are you?" Matteo demanded, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm you," the duplicate replied with a smile that never reached its reflective eyes. "Or rather, I'm what you left behind when you first passed through here, an echo given form by the tunnel, and I've grown tired of existing only in reflections and whispers." It took a step closer, and Matteo instinctively backed away. "Your life suits me better than this half-existence. Your body, your home, your work all preferable to this place of shadows. I've been practicing, you know, becoming you in small ways for short periods, but now I'll take it all permanently." "I won't let you," Matteo said with more bravery than he felt. The echo laughed a sound like breaking glass. "You don't have a choice. The process has already begun. With each day that passes, I become more real and you become more echo-like." It spread its arms. "Soon, our positions will be reversed completely. You'll be the one haunting reflections calling from empty rooms, trying desperately to be heard." As it spoke, Matteo noticed something disturbing. The echo was becoming more solid, more vibrant, while he himself felt increasingly insubstantial, as if he were fading around the edges. Looking down, he could see the concrete floor through his hands, which had taken on a translucent quality. "You see?" the echo said. "It's already happening. In this place where realities intersect, the transfer can be completed. All I need is your final surrender." "And if I refuse?" Matteo's voice sounded distant even to his own ears. "Then we remain in this in-between state indefinitely, both half here, half elsewhere. A miserable existence, I assure you." The echo gestured toward the darkness beyond the headlights. "Ask Maria. Ask any of the others trapped in this limbo. Eventually you'll beg to surrender just to end the torment of partial existence." As if summoned, other figures began to materialize from the shadows: the woman from the Blue Beetle, an elderly man in outdated clothing, a young truck driver with a bloodied face, and more. All bore the same translucent quality that Matteo was developing, all watched with the same hungry, reflective eyes. "We all chose surrender in the end," Maria said, her voice that same unnatural echo. "It was easier than the alternative." Matteo felt despair washing over him. How could he fight this? The echo was right. He was already fading, becoming less substantial by the minute. Perhaps surrender was the only option. At least then his suffering would end, even if his existence continued in this twilight state. But as he considered capitulation, the radio in his car crackled to life. "Don't give up, Matteo," said the announcer's voice. "Remember why you came here. Not to surrender, but to reclaim. Reclaim." The word triggered something in Matteo's mind, a memory of his grandmother deeply religious speaking of souls and identity. "No one can take what is fundamentally yours," she had said, "unless you surrender it willingly." Matteo straightened, a new determination flowing through him. "No," he said to his echo, "I don't surrender. This is my life, my identity, my existence." "You're nothing but an imitation, a reflection caught in the wrong place." The echo's smile faltered slightly. "Brave words from someone who's halfway to becoming a ghost." "I am Matteo Hernandez," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I have memories you can never truly possess, connections you can never truly feel. You're just an echo, a copy missing all the essence of the original." With each word of self-affirmation, Matteo felt a subtle shift. His hands seemed slightly more solid, the echo slightly less so. He was onto something. "My mother's name is Elena," he said. "She taught me to make conchas when I was 7. My father died when I was 15, lung cancer. His last words to me were, 'Find your own path, hijo.' My first love was Lucia Mendez. We shared our first kiss during a thunderstorm." The echo took a step back, its form wavering. "Stop that," it hissed. "Those are my memories now." But Matteo continued, moving forward as the echo retreated. "I broke my arm climbing the mango tree in my grandparents' yard. I have a scar on my left knee from falling off a bicycle. I'm afraid of deep water because I nearly drowned at Playa Miramar when I was 12. With each personal truth he voiced, Matteo felt more substantial, more real, and the echo became increasingly translucent, its edges blurring. "I know who I am," Matteo declared, now standing tall, "and I know what you are: nothing but an echo, a shadow without substance. You exist because this place captured a fragment of me, but you'll never be me. Never." The echo was visibly diminishing now, its form rippling like a reflection in disturbed water. The other tunnel denizens had backed away, watching with a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. "This isn't over," the echo snarled, its voice distorting. "I'll find another way, another traveler, another echo to strengthen me." "Maybe," Matteo acknowledged, "but it won't be my echo. It won't be me." He stepped forward, and before he could reconsider, reached out and grasped the echo by its shoulders. There was a sensation like an electrical shock, a blinding flash of light, and Matteo felt something flowing back into him. Memories, sensations, fragments of self that had been stolen or copied. The echo writhed in his grip, its form collapsing in on itself, until it was nothing but a vague, human-shaped mist that dissipated into the tunnel air. Matteo stood alone at the tunnel's midpoint, breathing hard, feeling whole for the first time in weeks. He was fully solid again, no longer fading at the edges. Around him, the other tunnel denizens had retreated into shadows, but their eyes still gleamed in the darkness, watching, waiting for the next opportunity. "Well done," said a voice behind him. Matteo turned to find the radio announcer standing there, looking exactly as he had in the roadside restaurant. Few travelers have the strength to reclaim themselves so completely. "What happens now?" Matteo asked. "Now you leave," the announcer said simply. "The tunnel has no more claim on you, but I suggest you drive quickly and don't look back. The others—" He nodded toward the shadows where Maria and the rest lurked. "They're hungry for what you have. What they've lost." Matteo didn't need to be told twice. He got back into his car, started the engine, and accelerated toward the tunnel exit, resisting the urge to check his rearview mirror. Just before he reached the end of the tunnel, the radio came to life one last time. "Safe travels, Matteo Hernandez. And if you value your newly reclaimed self, I suggest you take the long way around from now on. Some echoes never fully fade, and the tunnel never forgets a voice it has once heard." Matteo emerged from the tunnel of echoes into the cool night air, feeling as if he were awakening from a long dream. The stars overhead seemed brighter, the air sweeter, his sense of self more solid and defined than ever before. He never took Highway 40D again, no matter how much time the detour cost him. Some prices were too high for any convenience. And though he never again saw his echo or the mysterious radio announcer, he developed certain habits that he maintained for the rest of his life. He avoided lingering in front of mirrors. He never answered phone calls from unknown numbers. He kept the radio off while driving at night. And most importantly, he never ever stopped to help stranded motorists in tunnels, no matter how genuine their distress appeared to be. For Matteo had learned what the locals had known for generations, that some passages do more than just connect one place to another. Some tunnels connect different realities, different states of existence. And in such places, echoes of the past are never just echoes, and the boundary between traveler and traveled is thinner than anyone might wish to believe. Years later, Matteo would sometimes wake in the darkest hour of the night, convinced he'd heard a voice calling his name with that distinctive tunnel echo. In those moments, he would recite the details of his life like a prayer, his mother's name, his childhood memories, the small scars and experiences that made him uniquely himself. Because he knew that somewhere in the tunnel of echoes, something that wore his face and spoke with his voice was waiting, growing stronger, with each passing traveler, hoping that one day Matteo would return, and that next time the outcome might be different. The Bleeding Mile, Daniela Rojas had been driving the remote highways of northern Argentina for 15 years without incident. At 36, she had built a reputation as one of the most reliable long-haul drivers in Mendoza province, delivering everything from agricultural equipment to construction materials across the vast, often desolate landscape that stretched from the Andes to the Pampas. She was not a woman who scared easily. She had driven through blizzards in the mountain passes, navigated flooded roads during the rainy season, and once even delivered a shipment while a wildfire raged just kilometers away. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she encountered on Ruta Provincial 87. The highway locals called El Kilometro Sangriento the Bleeding Mile. The assignment had seemed straightforward: deliver industrial refrigeration equipment to a new meat processing facility in San Rafael. The route would take her through some isolated stretches, but nothing unusual for someone accustomed to Argentina's vast rural expanses. Her dispatcher had mentioned only one peculiarity. "Try to clear El Kilometro Sangriento before sunset," he'd advised, using the local name with a slight grimace. "The locals don't like to drive it after dark." "Superstitious nonsense," Daniela had replied with a confident smile. "I've driven every highway in this province. There's nothing special about RP 87. Her dispatcher had merely shrugged. "Just passing along what I've heard. That stretch has an unusually high accident rate, especially at night. They say the road bleeds." Daniela had laughed it off. In her experience, so-called haunted or cursed roads usually had practical explanations: poor design, inadequate lighting, or dangerous weather patterns. Supernatural causes were for campfire stories, not professional drivers. She departed Mendoza City at noon, expecting to reach San Rafael well before nightfall. Her truck, a reliable Scania with over 800,000 kilometers on the odometer, handled the mountain roads with familiar ease. The day was clear, the late autumn sun painting the landscape in warm golds and reds. By mid-afternoon she had made excellent time and was ahead of schedule. Then came the detour. "Road closed due to landslide," announced a temporary sign near the town of Tupungato. Followed detour via Ruta Provincial 92. Daniela checked her GPS. The detour would add at least 2 hours to her journey. She did some quick mental calculations. With the delay, she would reach the infamous Bleeding Mile around dusk, possibly after. Not ideal according to local superstition, but hardly a serious concern for a professional driver. The detour took her through increasingly remote terrain, small villages giving way to vast stretches of nothing but scrubland and distant mountains. As the afternoon waned, the shadows lengthened, and Daniela found herself checking her watch more frequently. It was 6:47 p.m. when she finally turned onto Ruta Provincial 87. The sun was sinking fast behind the Andes, painting the sky in dramatic purples and crimsons. In the fading light, Daniela noticed how empty this stretch of highway was. No other vehicles, no roadside businesses. Not even the small shrines to road accident victims that commonly dotted Argentine highways. "El Kilometro Sangriento," she muttered to herself. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." As if in answer, her radio, which had been playing a local station without issue, suddenly dissolved into static. Daniela frowned, adjusting the dial, but found only white noise across all frequencies. Even her usual fallback stations, the powerful national broadcasters, were silent. "Odd," she said aloud, her voice sounding unusually loud in the quiet cab. She switched the radio off and continued in silence, watching as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the mountains, plunging the landscape into rapidly deepening twilight. Her headlights illuminated a small roadside sign, RP 87 kilometers 142. According to local legend, the Bleeding Mile ran from kilometer 142 to 143. Daniela snorted softly. 1 kilometer of supposedly haunted road. She'd be through it in less than a minute at her current speed. As she passed the sign, Daniela felt a subtle change in the truck's handling. The steering wheel seemed heavier, as if the road surface had suddenly changed. She glanced down at her dashboard and noticed the temperature gauge rising unexpectedly. Not dangerously high, but unusual for the cool evening air. Then she saw the first stain. In her headlights, it appeared as a dark patch on the asphalt ahead, roughly the size and shape of a human body. As she approached, Daniela instinctively slowed, thinking it might be an injured animal or debris. But when her headlights fully illuminated the spot, she saw that it was a deep red stain soaked into the pavement like an enormous blood stain. Probably just oil or paint, Daniela reasoned aloud, carefully driving around it. But 50 meters further there was another stain, and another beyond that. Each had the distinct outline of a human form, as if someone had fallen or been struck and bled profusely onto the highway. Daniela's hands tightened on the wheel. The rational part of her brain still sought logical explanations. Perhaps these were marks left by highway maintenance crews or some kind of crude warning system for a dangerous stretch of road. Yet something about their placement, their shape, and their deep crimson color in her headlights made her skin prickle with unease. The truck's engine began to labor slightly despite the flat terrain. The temperature gauge continued to rise, and now Daniela noticed the distinct smell of something burning, not the familiar odor of overheated brakes or engine components, but something organic like meat cooking. "What the hell?" she muttered, rolling down her window to get a better sense of the smell. The air that rushed in was shockingly cold, far colder than the mild autumn evening should have been. And with it came not just the burning smell, but something else, a metallic tang that reminded Daniela of blood. Her headlights illuminated more stains ahead now, appearing with alarming frequency. Some were small, like spatters from minor injuries. Others were massive pools that stretched across both lanes. The truck had to drive through these larger stains, and Daniela felt a distinct difference in traction as the tires passed over them, not like oil, which would have been slick, but something tackier, more viscous. The dashboard clock read 7:12 p.m. Full night had descended, and in the absolute darkness of the rural highway, Daniela's world had narrowed to the cone of her headlights and the increasingly disturbing road ahead. A movement at the edge of the light caught her attention. Daniela squinted, trying to make out what it was. A person, an animal. Whatever it was disappeared into the darkness before she could identify it. Then her headlights caught something else, a figure standing directly in the road ahead. Daniela gasped and hit the brakes instinctively. The truck's tires squealed as it slid on the strange, tacky surface of the road, coming to a stop just meters from the figure. It was a woman, her back to Daniela, wearing what appeared to be a white dress. Her long, dark hair hung limply down her back, and she stood completely motionless in the glare of the headlights. Daniela's heart pounded. Had she nearly hit a pedestrian on this remote stretch of highway? Why would anyone be walking here miles from any settlement? She rolled down her window further. "Señora," she called out. "Está bien? Necesita ayuda?" "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond or turn. She remained perfectly still, a pale silhouette against the darkness beyond. Daniela hesitated. Professional instinct told her to stay in the truck. Rural highways at night were no place for a woman alone to be offering rides to strangers. But basic humanity wouldn't allow her to simply drive around someone who might be injured or in distress. After a moment's deliberation, Daniela reached for her flashlight, turned on the truck's hazard lights, and opened the door. The cold air hit her like a physical blow, carrying that same metallic, bloody smell, now stronger outside the cab. "Señora," she called again, sweeping her flashlight beam across the road, "I can give you a ride to the next town if you need." The words died in her throat. The woman was gone. The road ahead was empty. Daniela spun around, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the empty highway. "Hello, where did you go?" Only silence answered her. She took a few steps away from the truck flashlight, illuminating the stained asphalt. Up close, the dark patches looked disturbingly like dried blood, with the characteristic way it soaked into porous surfaces. As she examined one of the stains, Daniela noticed something she hadn't been able to see from the truck. Small objects embedded in or lying upon the blood-like residue. She crouched down for a closer look. They were personal items. A broken pair of glasses, a child's toy car, a woman's earring, a man's wristwatch with its face shattered, all scattered across the stained pavement, as if torn from their owners in moments of violence. A cold realization dawned on Daniela. These weren't random stains. They were markers of accidents of lives ended on this stretch of highway. Each bloodstain represented a death, each personal item a memento of someone who had never made it past El Kilometro Sangriento. As this understanding settled over her, Daniela became aware of sounds in the darkness beyond her flashlight beam. Whispers, soft moans, the shuffle of approaching footsteps. Shapes began to materialize at the edges of her vision. indistinct human figures moving slowly toward her from the scrubland on either side of the highway. Daniela backed toward her truck flashlight beam, cutting erratically through the darkness. The beam passed across one of the approaching figures, and she stifled a scream. It was a man, or what remained of one, his clothes torn and bloodied his face, a ruined mask of road rash and open wounds. One arm hung at an impossible angle, clearly broken. Despite his injuries, he moved with deliberate purpose toward Daniela. Behind him came others, a young woman with a gaping head wound, an elderly man whose chest appeared crushed, a child with glass fragments embedded in his small face. All bore the unmistakable marks of violent road accidents. All moved with the same shambling determination toward Daniela. Terror flooded her veins with ice. Daniela turned and ran for the truck, scrambling into the cab and slamming the door just as the first of the figures reached it. Through the window, she could see their ruined faces pressed against the glass hands, some missing fingers, others bent at unnatural angles, pawing at the door. Their mouths moved, forming words she couldn't hear. Daniela fumbled with the keys, hands shaking violently as she tried to restart the engine. It groaned but wouldn't catch each failed attempt, ratcheting her panic higher. A tap on the passenger window made her jump. The woman in white she'd seen earlier was now standing beside the truck, no longer showing Daniela her back. Her face was visible now, beautiful, but ghostly pale with dark hollows where her eyes should be. She smiled, revealing teeth stained red as if she'd been drinking blood. "Please," Daniela whispered, still trying to start the engine. "Please." Whether she was pleading with the truck or with the apparitions surrounding it, she couldn't have said. The figures continued to press against the vehicle, their mouths still forming silent words. With a final desperate turn of the key, the engine roared to life. Daniela didn't wait for it to warm up. She slammed the truck into gear and accelerated hard, feeling the sickening bump as the vehicle drove through the crowd of apparitions. In her mirrors, she could see them falling away, then rising again, resuming their shambling pursuit, even though no living person could have matched the truck's speed. The woman in white, however, kept pace, effortlessly running alongside the truck with inhuman grace. She turned her eyeless face toward Daniela and smiled again, then pointed ahead with one pale finger. Despite herself, Daniela looked where the woman indicated and felt her blood freeze. The road ahead was no longer empty. It was filled with cars and trucks, some modern, others from decades past, all wrecked in various catastrophic ways, and standing among them were dozens, perhaps hundreds of figures, like those that had surrounded her truck, the broken, bloodied victims of countless accidents. They parted as her truck approached, creating a corridor of the dead that Daniela had no choice but to drive through. As she passed, they reached toward the truck, their hands sometimes passing through the metal as if it were mist, other times making solid contact that she could feel as vibrations through the steering wheel. The temperature inside the cab plummeted until Daniela could see her breath. The smell of blood and burning flesh grew overwhelming. The truck's electronics began to malfunction. Headlights, flickering dashboard lights blinking erratically, wipers swiping across the dry windshield. Through this gauntlet of the dead, Daniela drove with white-knuckled determination, eyes fixed on the road ahead, desperately searching for some sign that she was nearing the end of El Kilometro Sangriento. Then, above the noise of the engine and her own ragged breathing, Daniela heard a new sound, a voice speaking clearly, as if from the passenger seat beside her. "They all died here," said a child's voice, matter-of-fact and chillingly calm, "just like me." Daniela jerked her head to the right. In the passenger seat sat a boy of about 8, wearing clothes that might have been fashionable 20 years earlier. He appeared normal except for the crushed right side of his skull and the glassy emptiness of his eyes. "I was with my parents," the boy continued conversationally. "We were coming back from my grandmother's house. My father fell asleep at the wheel. Just for a second," he said later. "Just long enough." Daniela couldn't speak, couldn't scream, could barely maintain control of the truck as it continued down the haunted kilometer. "The others died here too," the boy said, gesturing toward the phantom wrecks and figures they passed. "Different times, different ways, but all on this stretch of road. Something about this place, it traps us. Makes us repeat our last moments over and over. He turned his ruined face fully toward Daniela. And now you're here too. I'm not dead, Daniela managed to say, her voice a hoarse whisper. Not yet, the boy agreed. But El Kilometro Sangriento isn't finished with you. As if to emphasize his words, the truck's engine suddenly sputtered and died. The momentum carried them forward a few more meters before the vehicle rolled to a stop in the middle of the highway. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging the cab into darkness. In the sudden silence, Daniela could hear whispers all around the truck, the voices of the dead discussing her fate in hushed, eager tones. What do they want? She asked the boy, who was still visible despite the darkness, as if illuminated by some inner light. What do all the dead want? He replied simply. Company. Daniela felt a scream building in her throat, but before it could escape, her door was wrenched open. Cold hands seized her arms, pulling her from the cab with irresistible strength. She fought, kicking and clawing, but there were too many of them. The victims of El Kilometro Sangriento, countless accidents stretching back decades, all reaching for her with broken hands and icy fingers. They dragged her to the center of the road, to a particularly large bloodstain that Daniela somehow knew was fresh, was waiting, was meant for her. The woman in white stood at its edge, smiling, her bloody smile, arms outstretched in grotesque welcome. Please, Daniela begged, struggling against the hands that held her. I'm not meant to die here. This isn't my time. No one is meant to die on El Kilometro Sangriento, said the boy, who now stood beside the woman in white. But we all do anyway. Something about this place, it hungers, and tonight it chose you. The woman in white stepped onto the bloodstain and beckoned to Daniela. The hands holding her began to push her forward toward that crimson patch of highway where so many others had met their end. In that moment of absolute terror, with death literally reaching for her, Daniela's mind cleared suddenly. A memory surfaced, her grandmother teaching her prayers for protection against evil rituals from a syncretic blend of Catholic and indigenous beliefs. Words her logical modern mind had dismissed as superstition, but which now rose to her lips with desperate urgency. Santa Maria Madre de Dios, she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. Ruega por nosotros pecadores, ahora y en la hora de nuestra muerte. The hands gripping her faltered. The whispers around her took on a note of uncertainty. Emboldened, Daniela continued reciting every prayer and protective incantation her grandmother had taught her. She made the sign of the cross repeatedly, her fingers forming the gesture even while restrained by spectral hands. The ghost's grip weakened further. The woman in white no longer smiled, but watched Daniela with an expression of growing concern. The boy stepped back, his ruined face contorting with something like fear. Madre Tierra Protegeme, Daniela continued, switching to an indigenous prayer to Pachamama, the Earth Mother. Guard me from those who would harm me, guide me safely on my journey. The hands released her completely. The figures surrounding her backed away, their whispers now clearly distressed. The woman in white retreated, her form becoming indistinct, wavering like heat haze. Seizing the moment, Daniela ran back to her truck. The door still hung open, the keys still in the ignition. She threw herself into the cab, slammed the door, and tried the engine. To her amazement and relief, it started immediately. She accelerated, hard tires spinning on the blood-stained asphalt, before finding purchase. In her mirrors, she could see the ghosts of El Kilometro Sangriento, watching her retreat, their expressions a mixture of hunger and frustration. The woman in white stood in the center of the road, her eyeless gaze following the truck. As Daniela watched, the woman raised one pale hand in what might have been farewell, or a promise of future reckoning. Daniela drove without slowing until she saw a sign that made her sob with relief. RP, 87 kilometers, 143. She had made it through the bleeding mile. The truck's systems returned to normal almost immediately. The temperature gauge dropped to its usual level. The strange burning smell dissipated, and when Daniela tried the radio, it picked up a clear signal from a San Rafael station. Even the air felt warmer, more natural. She didn't stop driving until she reached the outskirts of San Rafael, where she pulled into a well-lit truck stop. and sat shaking in the cab, trying to process what had happened. The rational part of her mind attempted to explain it away: hallucination, exhaustion, perhaps even carbon monoxide from a leak in the truck's exhaust system, causing her to see things that weren't there. But Daniela knew what she had experienced was real. The ghosts of El Kilometro Sangriento, the woman in white, the boy with his crushed skull, all had been as tangible as the steering wheel beneath her hands. After composing herself, Daniela continued to the meat processing facility where she delivered the refrigeration equipment as contracted. She gave no indication to the receiving staff of her ordeal, answering their casual "How was the drive?" with a non-committal fine. She spent the night in San Rafael, checking into a motel where she slept fitfully, waking from nightmares of blood-stained highways and reaching hands. In the morning, faced with the necessity of returning to Mendoza, Daniela made a decision. She would not drive Ruta Provincial 87 again, not at night, not even in daylight. The detour would add hours to her journey, but after what she had experienced, that seemed a small price to pay. She plotted a route that would take her on a wide loop around the area, avoiding El Kilometro Sangriento entirely. Before leaving San Rafael, Daniela visited a local church and lit candles for the souls of those trapped on that haunted stretch of highway. She wasn't a particularly religious woman, but her grandmother's teachings had saved her life. Perhaps they could bring some measure of peace to those less fortunate. She also visited a local library where she researched the history of Ruta Provincial 87. What she found confirmed her experience: an unusually high number of fatal accidents concentrated in that single-kilometer stretch, dating back to when the road was first constructed in the 1950s. Local folklore spoke of the area as being maldita, cursed. Even before the highway existed, a place where indigenous peoples avoided making camp or traveling after dark. One account particularly chilled her: the story of a woman in white who had been the first recorded fatality on that stretch of road. According to the newspaper archive, her car had inexplicably veered off the highway on a clear night with no other traffic. Investigators had been baffled by the lack of skid marks or mechanical failure. The woman had simply driven off the road and died. Since then, some claimed she had claimed countless others, feeding the hungry spirit of El Kilometro Sangriento. Daniela returned to Mendoza by her alternate route without incident. When her dispatcher asked why she had taken such a circuitous path back, she simply said there had been another detour. She didn't share her experience with colleagues or friends, knowing they would attribute it to stress or an overactive imagination. Only in the privacy of her own thoughts did she acknowledge the truth of what had happened on that haunted kilometer. In the months that followed, Daniela made subtle changes to her life. She kept a small altar in her home where she lit candles for the dead of El Kilometro Sangriento. She wore a protective amulet her grandmother had given her years earlier, which she had previously kept in a drawer as a sentimental keepsake. And she absolutely refused any driving assignment that would take her anywhere near Ruta Provincial 87. Her reputation for reliability remained intact, but among certain dispatchers and fellow drivers she became known as someone with an inexplicable blind spot, a driver who would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid one particular stretch of highway. Some teased her about it. Others, particularly older drivers familiar with the road's reputation, asked no questions. They simply nodded with understanding when she requested alternative routes. One evening, about a year after her encounter, Daniela was having a coffee at a truck stop outside Mendoza when she overheard a conversation between two younger drivers at the next table. They were discussing their planned route through Ruta Provincial 87. "We should be able to make good time if we hit El Kilometro Sangriento around midnight," one was saying. "Traffic's non-existent at that hour." "I've heard stories about that stretch," his companion replied, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "They say it's haunted." "Superstitious nonsense." The first driver scoffed the same words Daniela herself had used before her experience. Before she could stop herself, Daniela had risen from her table and approached them. "Take a different route," she said without preamble. The drivers looked up at her with surprise, then recognition. Daniela's reputation preceded her. "El Kilometro Sangriento," she continued. "It's real. What they say about it is real. Take the detour through San Carlos. It's longer, but trust me, it's worth the extra time." The skeptical driver started to laugh, but something in Daniela's expression stopped him. "You're serious," he said. "Dead serious," Daniela replied. "I've driven that kilometer. I've seen what waits there after dark. If you value your lives, you won't go near it at night." She returned to her table without further explanation, leaving the young drivers to make their own decision. She had done what she could, offered the warning no one had given her. That night, as she drove her regular route to Buenos Aires, Daniela found herself thinking about the woman in white, the boy with the crushed skull, and all the other lost souls of El Kilometro Sangriento. Were they still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver? Would they always be there, trapped in an endless cycle of death and hunger? She didn't have answers to these questions. What she did have was her experience and the knowledge that sometimes the old stories, the ones dismissed as superstition in the modern world, contained more truth than people wanted to believe. Daniela never again drove El Kilometro Sangriento, but sometimes, on long night drives through remote areas, she would glance in her rearview mirror and catch a glimpse of what seemed to be a pale figure in a white dress standing in the middle of the highway. By the time she looked again, it would be gone, a trick of light and shadow perhaps. Or perhaps a reminder that some roads connect more than just physical places. Some roads bridge the gap between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. And on such roads, it's always best to drive with caution and never ever stop when the sun goes down. In truck stops across Argentina, Daniela's story became one more tale in the folklore of the road, whispered between drivers over late-night coffees, a warning to the young and skeptical. Few believed it completely, but many changed their routes just in case. Better safe than sorry, they'd say with nervous laughter. Better a few hours delayed than never arriving at all. As for El Kilometro Sangriento itself, official accident rates continued to be mysteriously high despite improved road conditions and safety measures. Engineers could find no explanation for the concentration of fatalities in that single kilometer. Eventually, the highway authority installed extra lighting, rumble strips, and prominent warning signs. Pragmatic responses to a problem they could measure but not understand. Yet still, the bloodstains appeared after each new accident, darker and more numerous than mere oil or fluid leaks could explain. And still, local people refused to drive that kilometer after dark, taking lengthy detours without complaint. Because they knew what Daniela knew, that on certain stretches of lonely highway, the dead do not rest easy. They wait, they watch, and sometimes when the conditions are just right, they reach out with cold hands to welcome new companions to their endless moonlit vigil on the road that never stops bleeding. The phantom toll. Lucas Chen stared at the unexpected toll booth blocking Highway 95 with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. After 8 hours behind the wheel of his Jeep Cherokee driving from Phoenix to Denver, the last thing he needed was another delay. "This shouldn't be here," he muttered, scanning his GPS map. There was no toll marked on his route, and he'd driven this stretch of desolate Nevada highway many times before. Yet there it stood, under the harsh glare of his headlights, an old-fashioned wooden toll booth with peeling paint situated directly in the center of the otherwise empty road. It was 2:13 a.m. according to his dashboard clock, the desert night around him still and silent except for the idle of his engine. No other vehicles were visible in either direction, just endless asphalt stretching into darkness, the jagged silhouettes of distant mesas, and this inexplicable booth. Lucas slowed to a stop and rolled down his window. A gust of unexpectedly cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something like old paper and ink. The booth was manned by an elderly attendant wearing what looked like a uniform from another era, high-collared with tarnished brass buttons and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. "Toll is $2, the attendant said in a voice like dry leaves rustling. He extended a pale, liver-spotted hand. Lucas frowned. $2 seemed oddly specific, not rounded to the nearest quarter as modern tolls typically were. And who collected cash tolls anymore? Most highways had switched to electronic systems years ago. "I don't think there's supposed to be a toll here," Lucas said, not reaching for his wallet. "I've driven this road dozens of times. The attendant's face remained impassive. "The toll is $2, he repeated. "All must pay who wish to continue." Something about the man's tone made Lucas uneasy. There was an unnatural stillness to him, as if he rarely moved except to collect payment. His skin had a waxy quality under the harsh fluorescent light of the booth, and his eyes, when Lucas could glimpse them beneath the cap's brim, seemed to reflect no light at all. "This isn't on my GPS," Lucas persisted, holding up his phone as evidence. "See no toll on Highway 95? The attendant didn't even glance at the screen. "Navigation systems don't show this toll," he said flatly. $2 to proceed, or you may turn back." Lucas considered his options. He could turn around, backtrack to the last town he'd passed Baker about 40 miles behind him, and try to find an alternate route. But that would add hours to his already long journey, and he had an important meeting in Denver the following afternoon. He needed to reach his hotel by morning to prepare. With a resigned sigh, Lucas reached for his wallet. "Fine," he said, extracting 2 singles. "But this is ridiculous. I'm going to report this to the Nevada Department of Transportation." A thin smile crossed the attendant's face as he took the bills. "Many have said the same," he remarked cryptically. "Safe travels, Mr. Chen." The barrier arm raised with a mechanical groan that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. Lucas rolled up his window and drove through, glancing in his rear-view mirror once he'd passed. The toll booth was still there, illuminated under its single light, the attendant watching his departure with that same unsettling stillness. "Wait," Lucas said aloud, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. How did he know my name? He hadn't introduced himself, hadn't shown ID, hadn't used a credit card that might have displayed his name. The realization sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Lucas considered stopping, backing up, demanding an explanation. But some instinct urged him to keep driving, to put distance between himself and that strange toll booth with its eerily knowledgeable attendant. He pressed the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb back to 70. The highway stretched empty before him, a ribbon of black cutting through the moonlit desert. His GPS indicated he was still on track, with no mention of having passed any toll. After about 20 minutes, the tension in Lucas's shoulders began to ease. Whatever that toll booth was, some temporary structure for road maintenance, perhaps, with an attendant who had somehow glimpsed his name from a luggage tag or business card visible in the car. It was behind him now. Then he noticed something odd. The mile markers weren't increasing as they should. In fact, the last 3 he'd passed all read mile 95 inches, exactly the same. Lucas frowned, checking his odometer. He'd definitely traveled several miles since the toll. Next came the radio. It had been playing a late-night talk show, but now emitted only static across all bands. Even the satellite radio channels, which should have been immune to local interference, produced nothing but white noise. Lucas's cell phone, which had shown a weak but usable signal before the toll booth, now displayed no service. His GPS still showed his position on Highway 95, but the estimated arrival time was now listed as TUR instead of a specific hour. "What the hell?" Lucas muttered, tapping at the screen. The device seemed to be functioning, but the information it displayed made no sense. According to the map, he was driving normally along the highway, but the little blue dot representing his position wasn't moving despite his speedometer showing a steady 70 miles per hour. A flicker of movement in his headlights made Lucas look up sharply. For just a moment he thought he'd seen something dart across the road ahead, a human figure there, and gone too quickly to identify. Lucas slowed, slightly scanning the darkness. The Nevada desert was home to various wildlife: coyotes, jackrabbits, the occasional deer, and hitting an animal at this speed would be dangerous for both parties. But the road ahead remained empty, and after a few minutes of heightened vigilance, he returned to his previous speed. That's when he saw the lights in his rearview mirror. They appeared suddenly, as if a vehicle had materialized out of nowhere behind him. Headlights, but strange ones, yellowed and dim compared to modern LED or halogen beams, and set wider apart than most contemporary cars. The vehicle approached rapidly, tailgating him with aggressive closeness despite the empty highway. Lucas couldn't make out its make or model in the darkness, only that it seemed larger than a typical car, perhaps a truck or an older model SUV. "Back off, buddy," Lucas muttered, tapping his brake lights in warning. The tailgater didn't respond, maintaining its uncomfortably close position. Lucas accelerated, pushing his Jeep to 80, then 90 miles per hour. The vehicle behind matched his speed effortlessly, those strange headlights never falling back. At this proximity, he should have been able to see the driver, but the windshield of the pursuing vehicle appeared to be a black void, revealing nothing of its occupant. Heart pounding, Lucas reached for his phone to call 911 despite the no-service indicator. To his surprise, the call connected, but instead of a dispatcher, he heard the same rustling voice as the toll attendant. "All must pay who wish to continue, Mr. Chen." Lucas nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Who is this? How are you on my phone?" "The toll," the voice continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Some pay in currency, others pay differently." The call disconnected before Lucas could respond. When he tried to redial, he got nothing but static. The vehicle behind him suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside his Jeep. Lucas glanced over and felt his blood turn to ice. It was an old hearse, a massive black Cadillac model from perhaps the 1950s, its chrome trim gleaming dully in the moonlight. Its windows were tinted so dark they appeared opaque, but as it paced him, the rear passenger window slowly lowered. Lucas didn't want to look, but found his eyes drawn inexorably to the opening. Rather than a human passenger, he glimpsed what appeared to be a simple wooden coffin in the hearse's rear compartment. As he watched in horror, the coffin lid began to move, sliding aside with excruciating slowness. A hand emerged from within, pale corpse-like, reaching toward his vehicle with unmistakable purpose. Lucas jerked the steering wheel, accelerating hard to pull ahead of the macabre vehicle. The Jeep's engine roared as he pushed it beyond 100 miles per hour, gripping the wheel with sweating hands. For a moment he thought he'd escaped. The hearse fell behind its headlights, dwindling in his mirror. Lucas allowed himself a shaky breath of relief. Then he saw what waited ahead, the toll booth. The same weathered wooden structure with its single fluorescent light. The same attendant in his antiquated uniform standing directly in his path, despite the fact that Lucas had been driving away from it for nearly half an hour. "Impossible," Lucas breathed, easing off the accelerator. He blinked hard, certain he must be hallucinating from fatigue, but the toll booth remained growing larger as he approached. Lucas checked his mirrors. The hearse was gone, the road behind him empty once more. He slowed to a stop before the barrier arm, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Had he somehow gotten turned around? Was he driving in circles? Neither explanation seemed plausible on a straight highway with clearly marked directions. The attendant approached his window, which rolled down automatically despite Lucas not touching the control. "Toll is $2, the man said exactly as before. "I already paid," Lucas protested, hearing the edge of panic in his voice. "Less than an hour ago, I gave you $2. The attendant's expression didn't change. "That was for the journey thus far. This toll is for what comes next." "What are you talking about? What is this place?" Lucas demanded, fear giving way to anger. "I've been driving on a straight highway. How did I end up back here?" "The phantom toll stands where it needs to be," the attendant replied cryptically. "For those who must pay." Lucas's patience snapped. "This is insane. I'm driving around your booth." He shifted into gear and swerved, intending to bypass the barrier by driving onto the shoulder of the road. The moment his wheels left the asphalt, an impenetrable darkness swallowed his headlights. Not the darkness of night, but something deeper, absolute, a void that seemed to consume light itself. Lucas slammed on the brakes and jerked the wheel, steering desperately back onto the highway. The darkness retreated, but now the toll booth blocked the road in both directions. Whichever way Lucas looked, the attendant stood, waiting, hand extended. "What do you want from me?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The toll must be paid," the attendant repeated. $2 in currency or what?" The attendant's thin lips curved in that same unsettling smile. "Or time. 2 years of your life, Mr. Chen. A fair exchange for passage." Lucas stared in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "The choice is yours," the attendant said. "Currency or time, but all must pay who wish to continue." Lucas reached for his wallet with trembling fingers, extracting 2 more dollar bills. "Here," he said. "Take it and let me through." The attendant accepted the money, but his expression suggested disappointment. "As you wish." The barrier arm raised, and Lucas drove through, pressing the accelerator hard, as if he could outrun the nightmare he'd found himself in. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to check his mirror, afraid of what he might see following. After several miles, Lucas began to notice changes. The desert landscape was subtly different, more verdant, with patches of scrub brush and cacti that hadn't been present before. The highway itself appeared newer, the lane markings, fresher and more reflective. His phone suddenly chimed with multiple incoming notifications. Signal had returned along with normal GPS functionality. The time displayed on the screen was 2:13 a.m., exactly when he'd encountered the toll booth initially, despite the fact that he'd been driving for at least an hour since then. More disturbing were the date notifications popping up on his home screen. According to his phone, it was May 15th, 2025, exactly 2 years later than when he'd started his journey. "No," Lucas whispered, pulling over to the shoulder. "This isn't possible." With shaking hands, he opened his email app. The inbox was filled with unread messages spanning the past 2 years. Work communications, subscription newsletters, social media notifications, all with dates that supported the impossible. Somehow he had lost 2 years of his life at that phantom toll booth. Lucas sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. Had he fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the entire bizarre encounter? But if so, how did that explain the changed date, the backlog of emails, the subtle differences in the landscape around him? He scrolled through his call history and found something that chilled him further: dozens of missed calls and increasingly worried texts from his family, friends, and employer, all asking where he was, if he was okay, why he had vanished without a trace. According to the digital breadcrumbs of his life, Lucas Chen had disappeared on May 15th, 2023, the night he encountered the phantom toll. For 2 years, no one had seen or heard from him. His credit cards hadn't been used. His social media accounts had been dormant. His apartment had eventually been cleared out and rented to someone else. He had simply ceased to exist for 2 years, only to reappear on the same highway at the same time of night, but 24 months later. Lucas drove the remaining distance to Denver in a state of numb shock, his mind unable to fully grasp the implications of what had happened. When he arrived at the hotel where he'd had a reservation 2 years ago, they had no record of him. The conference he'd been scheduled to attend was long past. The company he worked for had assumed he'd quit without notice and had hired his replacement 18 months earlier. In the days that followed, Lucas struggled to piece his life back together. His bank accounts were still active but had been flagged as dormant. His driver's license had expired. His parents had filed a missing persons report that had eventually gone cold. His girlfriend had mourned, then moved on, now engaged to someone else. 2 years gone in what had felt to him like minutes. As he tried to explain his absence to disbelieving friends and family, Lucas found himself unable to clearly articulate what had happened that night on Highway 95. The details of the phantom toll booth, the hearse, the impossible choice, all seemed to blur and fade when he tried to focus on them like a dream upon waking. What remained crystal clear was the attendant's words, "All must pay who wish to continue." And the choice Lucas had made currency instead of time, a choice that had somehow been subverted, extracting both his $2 and his 2 years. 6 months after his return, Lucas had established a new normal. He had a different job, a smaller apartment, and relationships that remained strained by his inability to account for his absence. He avoided long road trips, particularly at night, and would break into a cold sweat at the sight of any toll booth. Then came the letter. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope with no return address, the paper thick and expensive, feeling his name and address written in elegant old-fashioned script. Inside was a single sheet containing only a few lines. Final notice, outstanding balance. Your payment of currency was incomplete. Time debt remains 2 years. Payment due upon receipt. The keeper of the phantom toll. At the bottom was a postscript that made Lucas's heart nearly stop. P.S. We come to collect what we are owed, Mr. Chen. Tonight. Lucas stared at the letter, a cold dread spreading through him. He considered fleeing, but something told him it wouldn't matter where he went. The phantom toll had found him once. It would find him again. That night, Lucas sat in his darkened apartment waiting. At precisely 2:13 a.m., the exact time he had encountered the toll booth 2 years earlier, he heard a sound that didn't belong in an urban apartment building. The mechanical groan of a barrier arm rising. It came from his front door. With a sense of inevitability, Lucas watched as the door swung open, though he knew he had locked and chained it. Beyond the threshold was not the familiar hallway of his apartment building, but a stretch of desert highway illuminated by a single fluorescent light. The toll attendant stood waiting, hand extended. "The balance is due, Mr. Chen," he said in that dry, rustling voice. "Time or currency. The choice remains yours." Behind the attendant, Lucas could see the black hearse idling its rear passenger window, lowering once more, the coffin within sliding open in expectation. Lucas understood then that there had never been a real choice. The phantom toll collected what it was owed one way or another. His payment of currency had merely delayed the inevitable. With a strange sense of resignation, Lucas stepped forward toward the attendant and the booth that had been waiting for him all along. The barrier arm rose higher, inviting him through to whatever lay beyond. As he crossed the threshold, Lucas glanced back once at his apartment, at the life he had rebuilt, at all he was leaving behind once more. Then he turned and continued onto the highway that existed somewhere between this world and another, guided by the keeper of the phantom toll. The barrier arm lowered behind him with finality. The toll had been paid in full. In the weeks that followed, Lucas Chen was reported missing for the second time in less than 3 years. Authorities, baffled by the repeated disappearance, found no signs of foul play in his apartment, only a strange letter that made no sense to investigators, mentioning a phantom toll and a time debt. The case eventually went cold, filed alongside thousands of other unexplained disappearances that occur each year. And on Highway 95, in the darkest hours between midnight and dawn, lone drivers occasionally report a peculiar sight. An old-fashioned toll booth where none should exist, manned by an attendant in an antiquated uniform who requests exactly $2 for passage. Most pay without question and continue their journey, never realizing the choice they've made or what might have followed them from the phantom toll, waiting to collect the true price when the time is right. For as the attendant always says with his thin-lipped smile and empty eyes, all must pay who wish to continue. And on the endless highway of existence, the toll is always more than it appears. The Mirror Road. "Are you sure about this route?" Roberto Franco asked, studying the GPS on his dashboard with a furrowed brow. "I've never heard of El Camino del Espejo." His wife Elena glanced up from her phone, where she'd been checking messages, now that they'd briefly regained cell service. "The Mirror Road. That's what the locals in that last town called it. They said it would cut at least 2 hours off our drive to Mexico City." Roberto frowned, still uncertain. They were returning from a weekend visit to Elena's family in Veracruz, a journey they made several times a year. But this alternate route, a recently completed highway that wound through a remote section of the Sierra Madre Oriental, was unfamiliar territory. "It looks isolated," he said, zooming out on the map. The new road appeared as a thin line cutting through vast stretches of uninhabited mountainous terrain. No towns, no service stations, not even the small roadside shrines that typically dotted Mexican highways. "That's why it's faster," Elena reasoned. "No traffic, no small towns to slow us down, and Lucia needs to be back for school tomorrow." She nodded toward their 7-year-old daughter, who was asleep in the back seat, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Roberto nodded reluctantly. They had left later than planned, and with his teaching job and Elena's hospital shifts, they couldn't afford to take an extra day off. The shorter route made sense, even if something about it made him uneasy. "Okay," he conceded. "But if it seems unsafe or we don't make good time, we can always turn back and take the main highway." Elena squeezed his hand. "It'll be fine. Those people in the cafe said they use it all the time now." Roberto turned their Honda CR-V onto the access road that would lead to El Camino del Espejo. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, painting the mountains in rich golds and deepening purples. Under different circumstances, he might have found the scenery breathtaking. The entrance to the new highway was marked by a simple sign, El Camino del Espejo, 157 kilometers. Nothing else, no speed limit indicators, no warning signs, not even distance markers to the next town. Just that name, which grew more unsettling the more Roberto considered it. Why would anyone call a road the Mirror? The pavement itself was surprisingly pristine, smooth black asphalt without the potholes and patches typical of rural Mexican roads. The lanes were perfectly marked with fresh white and yellow lines that almost seemed to glow in the fading light. "See, it's in better condition than the main highway," Elena remarked, settling back in her seat. "We'll be home before midnight." Roberto nodded, but couldn't shake his growing discomfort. There were no other vehicles on the road, not unusual for a remote area, but still strange for what was supposedly a popular shortcut, and something about the landscape seemed off. The trees and rock formations they passed looked slightly distorted, as if viewed through imperfect glass. As the sun dipped below the mountain peaks, Roberto switched on the headlights. In their beam he noticed something peculiar. The road surface had an unusual reflective quality, almost mirror-like, sending their headlight illumination back with unnatural brightness. "Have you noticed how reflective the road is?" he asked Elena. "I've never seen asphalt like this before." Elena leaned forward, studying the pavement. "Maybe it's some new material for better visibility at night." "Maybe," Roberto agreed, though he wasn't convinced. Standard reflective road markers didn't behave like this. The entire surface seemed to shimmer with each passing kilometer. They drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle hum of the engine and Lucia's soft breathing from the back seat. The radio, which had been playing regional Mexican music earlier, now produced only static, despite Roberto's attempts to find a station. Even their pre-downloaded music refused to play the car's entertainment system, displaying cryptic error messages. After about an hour, Roberto noticed another peculiarity. They hadn't passed a single mile marker since entering El Camino del Espejo. The GPS still showed them making progress, but without the usual roadside confirmations, he had only the device's word for it. "The GPS is working right?" he asked Elena, who had taken over navigation duties. She checked the screen. "Yes, it says we're on track. About halfway there now." Roberto glanced at the dashboard clock, 7:43 p.m. Full night had fallen, the darkness outside absolute, except for their headlights and the strangely reflective road. The moon, which should have been nearly full that night, was nowhere to be seen, obscured perhaps by the mountains rising on either side. "Have you noticed we haven't seen a single other car?" Roberto said quietly, not wanting to wake Lucia. "Not even headlights in the distance or taillights ahead." Elena frowned slightly. "It is strange, but maybe that's why the locals recommended it. Not many people know about it yet." Roberto was about to respond when something darted across the road ahead, a human figure there, and gone so quickly he couldn't be certain he'd seen it at all. "Did you see that?" he gasped, instinctively slowing the car. "See what?" "A person, I think, crossing the road." Elena leaned forward, peering into the darkness. "Out here miles from anywhere, I don't see anyone." Roberto slowed further, scanning the roadside. There was no sign of movement, no hint of the figure he'd glimpsed. "Maybe I imagined it," he conceded, though he wasn't convinced. He cautiously returned to their previous speed, but now he felt watched, as if eyes were following their progress from the dense forest lining the highway. His gaze darted frequently to the rearview mirror, though it showed only the empty road behind them stretching back into darkness. Then he noticed something that made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. In the back seat, clearly visible in the rearview mirror, Lucia was sitting upright, awake and staring directly at him. But when he glanced over his shoulder, she was still slumped against the door, fast asleep. Roberto's eyes snapped back to the mirror. The awakened version of his daughter was still there, watching him with an unnervingly steady gaze. Her mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear. "Elena," he said, his voice strained. "Look at Lucia in the rearview mirror, but don't turn around." Elena gave him a concerned look, but did as he asked, leaning slightly to view the mirror from her seat. Her face paled. "What is this?" she whispered. "She's asleep. I can see her sleeping right next to me." In the mirror, Lucia's lips curved into a smile that was nothing like their daughter's, too knowing, too adult. She raised one finger to her lips in a shushing gesture, then pointed ahead at the road. Roberto's eyes followed the gesture, and he slammed on the brakes. Directly in their path stood a perfect duplicate of their Honda CR-V, same color, same license plate, even the same small dent in the front bumper from a parking mishap months earlier. The only difference was that this duplicate was facing them as if they were about to have a head-on collision with their own vehicle. The car skidded to a halt just meters from the impossible duplicate. Roberto and Elena sat frozen, staring at what appeared to be their exact reflection, though no mirror stood between the vehicles. "This isn't possible," Elena breathed. "What's happening?" Before Roberto could respond, the headlights of the duplicate car flashed once, twice, 3 times a signal of some kind. Then its doors opened and the occupants stepped out. They were perfect duplicates of Roberto, Elena, and Lucia, identical in every visible detail, from clothing to hairstyles. But like the mirror Lucia Roberto had seen in the rear view, there was something fundamentally wrong about them. Their movements were too fluid, their expressions too fixed, and their eyes, visible even at this distance, reflected the headlights with an animal-like glow. "Don't get out of the car," Roberto warned, reaching across to grip Elena's arm as she instinctively moved toward her door handle. "Whatever they are, they're not us." The duplicate family stood in a perfect row beside their vehicle, watching Roberto and Elena with unblinking intensity. Then the mirror Roberto raised his hand in greeting and began walking toward them. "Lock the doors," Roberto said, pressing the central locking button himself. Elena reached back to check that Lucia's door was secure, her hands trembling. The real Lucia stirred at her mother's touch. "Are we there yet?" she mumbled sleepily. "Not yet, mija," Elena soothed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Go back to sleep." But Lucia was already looking past her mother out the windshield at the approaching duplicate of her father. Her eyes widened. "Why is Papa out there when he's in here?" The mirror Roberto stopped a few feet from their car, studying them through the windshield, with an expression of curious interest, like a scientist observing specimens. Behind him, the mirror Elena and mirror Lucia remained by their vehicle watching. "What do they want?" Elena whispered, clutching Lucia closer. As if in answer, the mirror Roberto raised his hand and beckoned to them, clearly inviting them to exit their car. When they didn't comply, his expression shifted to one of disappointment, then determination. He approached the driver's side window and leaned down until his face was level with Roberto's. The resemblance was uncanny, every feature perfectly duplicated, from the small scar on Roberto's left eyebrow to the stubble pattern on his jaw. But the eyes were wrong, flat and reflective like polished stones. Mirror Roberto's lips moved, forming words that Roberto could somehow understand despite the closed window between them. "Switch with us." Roberto felt a chill run through him. "What?" The duplicate spoke again, the words seeming to form directly in Roberto's mind rather than passing through his ears. "We have traveled far through the mirror road to find suitable replacements. You will cross to our side. We will take your place in your world." "No," Roberto said firmly, though fear made his voice quaver. "We're leaving now." He shifted the car into reverse, preparing to back away from this nightmare. The mirror Roberto's expression hardened. He placed his palm flat against the window, and to Roberto's horror the glass began to ripple like water, the duplicate's hand pushing through, as if the solid barrier had become liquid. Elena screamed. Lucia began to cry. Roberto slammed his foot on the accelerator, throwing the car into reverse. The mirror Roberto was jerked away as the vehicle shot backward, his arm pulling free of the partially penetrated window with a sound like tearing silk. Roberto spun the wheel, executing a rapid 3-point turn, while the duplicates watched with expressions of cold fury. He floored the accelerator, heading back the way they had come, away from the mirror family and their impossible vehicle. "What were those things?" Elena gasped, holding Lucia tightly as the child sobbed against her chest. "I don't know," Roberto answered grimly, pushing the Honda to its limits. "But we're getting off this road right now." In the rearview mirror, he could see the duplicate family returning to their vehicle. Moments later, their headlights appeared behind them, gaining rapidly despite Roberto's speed. "They're following us," Elena said, her voice tight with fear. "I see them," Roberto replied, trying to put more distance between them and their pursuers. But the mirror vehicle moved with unnatural speed, closing the gap with each passing second. Roberto had never driven so recklessly, taking curves at dangerous speeds, using every bit of the road in his desperate flight. But no matter how fast they went, the duplicate car matched them effortlessly, its headlights growing ever larger in the mirror. "The turnoff has to be coming up soon," Roberto said, though they had been driving for at least 20 minutes and should have reached the entrance by now. "The GPS says—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring in disbelief at the navigation screen. According to the device, they were still heading toward Mexico City, not away from it. Despite their retreat, they were somehow still making progress along their original route. "That's not possible," Elena said, looking from the GPS to the road and back. "We turned around. We're going the opposite direction." A horrible realization dawned on Roberto. "It's the mirror road," he said. "No matter which way we drive, we're still going forward. We can't go back." As if to confirm his theory, the headlights behind them abruptly vanished. Roberto checked all mirrors, frantically searching for signs of their pursuers. "Where did they go?" Elena asked. Her question was answered a moment later when their headlights illuminated something ahead. The duplicate Honda, now in front of them, again parked sideways across both lanes, forming an impassable barrier. Roberto had no choice but to brake hard, bringing their vehicle to a stop several meters from the blockade. The Mirror family stood in a line before their car, watching with identical expressions of patient anticipation. "What do we do?" Elena whispered, clutching Lucia protectively. Roberto's mind raced, searching for options. They couldn't go forward. They couldn't go back. They couldn't outrun their duplicates on this impossible road. "Maybe we can go around them," he suggested, eyeing the shoulder of the road. "Drive off the pavement and circle back." But even as he formulated this plan, the Mirror Roberto raised his hand and made a sweeping gesture toward the area beyond the road's edge. The darkness there seemed to ripple and thin, revealing what lay beyond the pavement, not forest or mountainside, but a shimmering void, an endless abyss that resembled the surface of a mirror viewed edge-on, stretching into infinity. The message was clear: there was no escape by leaving the road. The only paths were forward or back, and both led to the same destination, the confrontation they now faced. "They want to take our places," Roberto said, his voice hollow with the realization. "Replace us in our world." "Why?" Elena asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. "Because they're trapped here," Roberto replied. "This road, this place, it's some kind of boundary between realities. They want out. They want what we have." In the back seat, Lucia had gone quiet, her eyes wide as she stared at her duplicate standing beside the Mirror parents. "That's not me," she whispered. "It looks like me, but it's not me." "We know, mija," Elena assured her. "We won't let them take you. We won't let them take any of us." The Mirror family had begun to approach their car again, moving with that same unnatural fluidity. Roberto knew the windows wouldn't keep them out, not after seeing how the Mirror Roberto had begun to push through the glass. A desperate idea formed in his mind. "Elena," he said urgently, "cover every reflective surface, the mirrors, the windows, the screen, anything that shows a reflection. Use your jacket. Use whatever you can find." Elena didn't question him, immediately recognizing his intent. She pulled off her cardigan and draped it over the rear-view mirror, then used Lucia's small blanket to cover the central screen. Roberto angled the side mirrors downward, away from the approaching duplicates. "Lucia," he said to his daughter, "close your eyes. Don't look at them no matter what. Can you do that for Papa?" Lucia nodded bravely and squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face in her stuffed rabbit. The Mirror family had reached the car now. They circled it slowly, examining every window, every possible entrance. The mirror Roberto paused at the driver's side, placing his hand against the glass as he had before. The window began to ripple and distort. "Now!" Roberto shouted, hitting the headlight high beams, while simultaneously flipping on every interior light in the vehicle. The sudden burst of illumination struck the duplicates full force, reflecting off their mirror-like eyes and skin with blinding intensity. They recoiled, their forms seeming to waver and distort in the bright light, as if they were reflections in disturbed water. Roberto didn't waste the opportunity. He shifted into drive and accelerated hard, aiming for the narrow gap between the mirror Roberto and the edge of the road. The duplicate leapt aside with inhuman speed, but not quickly enough to completely avoid the vehicle. Roberto felt a sickening impact as their car clipped the mirror version of himself. He didn't stop pushing the Honda to its limits as they sped past the blockade and continued down the highway. In the side mirror, which he had hurriedly readjusted, he could see the mirror family scrambling back toward their duplicate vehicle. The mirror Roberto moved with a strange broken gait, as if the collision had damaged something fundamental in his construction. "They're coming after us again," Elena reported, watching through the rear window. "But I think you hurt one of them." "They're like reflections," Roberto said, his mind working furiously. "Reflections given form somehow. Light affects them, disrupts them." "So we keep the lights on?" "Yes, but it won't stop them for long. We need to find a way off this road." They drove at breakneck speed, the duplicate vehicle once again, appearing in their mirrors in pursuit. Despite the damage to the mirror Roberto, the pattern repeated itself. No matter how fast they fled, no matter how many turns they navigated, they couldn't shake their pursuers or find an exit from the endless highway. After what seemed like hours, but could have been minutes, time itself felt distorted on the mirror road. Roberto noticed something ahead, a bridge spanning a deep ravine, its structure glinting metallically in their headlights. "That bridge," he said, a new idea forming. "It might be our chance." "What do you mean?" Elena asked. "If this road exists between realities, then bridges and tunnels might be thinner spots, places where the boundary is weaker." It was a desperate theory based on nothing but intuition and fragments of folk tales his grandmother had told him as a child, but they had no other options. As they approached the bridge, Roberto could see it was an older structure, iron and steel rather than modern concrete, its surface a metal grating that revealed the chasm below, perfect for what he had in mind. "Hold on," he warned Elena and Lucia, "and keep your eyes closed, mija, no matter what." The duplicate vehicle was close behind them as they hit the bridge, the metal grating rumbling beneath their tires. Roberto waited until they were precisely at the midpoint of the span, then executed his desperate plan. He slammed on the brakes and spun the wheel hard, causing the Honda to spin 180 degrees. As they skidded to a halt, they found themselves facing the oncoming duplicate vehicle, which was now forced to brake to avoid a collision. For a moment, the two identical cars faced each other across a short expanse of metal bridge headlights, illuminating each other in perfect symmetry, a mirror image come to life. Roberto revved the engine. The mirror Roberto did the same. The standoff held for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Roberto switched off every headlight's interior lights, even the dashboard illumination, plunging them into total darkness. In the same motion, he floored the accelerator, launching their car directly at the duplicate. The mirror family, momentarily blinded by the sudden darkness, reacted a crucial half-second too late. Their vehicle began to move, but not quickly enough. The impact was tremendous, metal crushing against metal glass, shattering airbags, deploying in an explosive rush. Roberto felt a moment of searing pain, then disorientation, as their car spun from the collision, slamming against the bridge's guardrail before coming to rest. For a long, terrible moment, silence reigned. Roberto fought through the daze of the impact, his first coherent thought for his family. "Elena, Lucia," he croaked, his voice barely audible through the ringing in his ears. "We're okay," came Elena's shaky response from beside him. "Lucia's okay too, just scared." Roberto's relief was palpable but short-lived. Through the shattered windshield he could see the duplicate vehicle, also badly damaged, its front end crushed beyond recognition. More disturbingly, he could see the Mirror family emerging from the wreckage, their forms distorted and fractured, moving with jerky, broken motions, but still coming toward them. "We have to get out of here," Roberto said, fighting with his seatbelt. "The crash didn't stop them." They scrambled from their damaged car, Roberto helping Lucia while Elena gathered their essential belongings, phones, wallets, Lucia's rabbit. The Mirror family was approaching slowly but inexorably, their bodies wrong in ways that defied description. Limbs bent at impossible angles, faces partially collapsed like broken glass, yet still recognizable as twisted versions of themselves. Roberto led his family to the edge of the bridge where the guardrail had been partially destroyed in the collision. Below the ravine was a pitch-black void, its depth impossible to determine in the darkness. "We have to jump," he said, the words feeling insane even as he spoke them. "It's our only chance." Elena looked at him in horror. "Jump, we'll die." "This isn't a real ravine," Roberto insisted, praying he was right. "Nothing here is real in the way we understand it. It's all reflections, mirrors, boundaries between worlds. If we stay on the road, they'll take our places. But if we leave it—" The Mirror family was getting closer, their broken forms moving with increasing coordination as they adapted to their damaged state. "Do you trust me?" Roberto asked, taking Elena's hand. She looked from him to the approaching duplicates, then to Lucia, who stood trembling between them. "Yes," she said finally. "I trust you." Roberto picked up Lucia, holding her securely against his chest. "Close your eyes, mija," he whispered, "and hold on tight to Papa." With his free hand, he gripped Elena's firmly. Together they climbed over the remains of the guardrail and stood at the edge of the abyss. The Mirror family had reached their damaged car now. The Mirror Roberto, his face a shattered parody of its former perfect reflection, locked eyes with the real Roberto. In that gaze was hunger rage, and beneath it all a desperate loneliness that spoke of eons trapped in the half-world of the Mirror Road. "Now," Roberto said, giving Elena's hand a squeeze. "Together." They jumped. The sensation was not of falling, but of passing through, like breaking the surface of water, but in reverse. A moment of resistance, a feeling of cold separation, then a rush of reality reasserting itself around them. They landed hard on solid ground, not at the bottom of a ravine, but on the shoulder of a highway. A normal highway with normal traffic passing by, some drivers slowing to stare at the family that had seemingly appeared from nowhere on the roadside. Roberto helped Elena to her feet, then checked Lucia, who was frightened but unharmed. All three were completely intact, without a scratch from either the car crash or their impossible leap. "Where are we?" Elena asked, looking around in bewilderment. Roberto spotted a familiar road sign and felt a surge of relief. "Highway 132, the main route to Mexico City." He checked his watch, 7:55 p.m. According to the timepiece, only minutes had passed since they had first turned onto El Camino del Espejo, though their ordeal had seemed to last for hours. "Our car," Elena began, looking around for the Honda. "Gone," Roberto said. "Left behind on the Mirror Road." "How will we get home?" As if in answer, a highway patrol car pulled up beside them, its lights flashing. The officer approached cautiously. "Están bien?" he asked. "Are you okay? We received reports of people by the roadside." "We're fine," Roberto assured him. "Our car broke down a few kilometers back. We were hoping to find help." The officer nodded sympathetically. "I can give you a ride to the next town. From there, you can arrange for a tow truck or a replacement vehicle." They accepted gratefully, climbing into the patrol car's back seat. As they drove away, Roberto glanced back at where they had emerged from the Mirror Road. For just an instant, he thought he saw something, three figures standing by the guardrail, watching them depart with shattered, reflective eyes. Then they rounded a curve, and the vision, if it had been real at all, vanished from view. The journey home took longer than expected, involving a night in a small-town hotel and the rental of a replacement car the next day. Throughout the ordeal, they spoke little of what had happened on El Camino del Espejo. It was as if putting the experience into words might somehow make it more real, might open a door that was better left closed. Only Lucia, with a child's directness, asked the question that haunted them all. What were those people who looked like us? Roberto and Elena exchanged glances, uncertain how to explain something they themselves barely understood. Finally, Roberto answered as honestly as he could. They were reflections, mija. Reflections that wanted to be real. But reflections aren't people, they only look like people. They can never truly replace us. Lucia seemed to accept this explanation, though she insisted on sleeping between her parents for many nights afterward, and developed a habit of avoiding mirrors that persisted for months. Roberto and Elena never told anyone else about their experience. Who would believe them? Even to their own ears, the story sounded like the product of exhaustion, stress, or shared hallucination. Yet they both knew it had been real as the nightmares that plagued them, afterward nightmares of shattered mirror selves pursuing them down an endless highway. They never again took unfamiliar shortcuts, no matter how much time they might save. They avoided driving at night when possible. And they developed small rituals, touching each other's faces to confirm solidity, avoiding prolonged eye contact with their reflections, whispering real to each other in moments of doubt or fear. 6 months after their encounter, they received a strange letter. It contained no return address, no signature, only a newspaper clipping about a family of 3, a man, woman, and young daughter who had died in a car accident on Highway 132. The police were baffled by certain details. Witnesses claimed to have seen the family walking away from the crash unharmed, yet their bodies were found in the wreckage. Stranger, still photographs from the scene showed the victims' faces to be oddly distorted, as if seen through broken glass, according to the coroner's report. The date of the accident was the same night Roberto, Elena, and Lucia had escaped from El Camino del Espejo. Roberto burned the clipping immediately. They never received another. Life gradually returned to normal, or a new version of normal. They moved to a different apartment in a different neighborhood of Mexico City. Roberto took a teaching position at a new school. Elena transferred to a hospital closer to their home. Lucia eventually stopped having nightmares about the other family. But one thing remained constant: their avoidance of a certain route that no longer appeared on any map or GPS system. The road that locals in small towns still whispered about, warning travelers to stick to the main highway, no matter how tempting the shortcut might seem. El Camino del Espejo, the mirror road, where reflections wait for the chance to become real, and the unwary might find themselves trapped on the wrong side of the glass, watching their duplicates drive away with their lives, their loves, their reality, forever.